The first thing I noticed was the cold. It seeped through the thin hospital gown, pressing against my skin like ice water. My chest ached with every breath. Bandages wound tightly around me as though to keep me from falling apart. A dull beeping filled the room, steady but distant. And when I turned my head toward the window, the Dallas sky was gray, heavy with January clouds. I was alive, but only just. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, my fingers trembling against the smooth screen. The brightness stabbed at my eyes. But I pushed through it. The nurse had told me I could go home soon. Rest and recovery would be better outside these walls. All I wanted was to feel the warmth of home again, to know I wasn't entirely alone in this world. Opening the family group chat, I typed slowly, each letter an effort. Can someone pick me up from the hospital? It was a simple request, the kind any daughter should answer without hesitation. I watched the screen, waiting, holding on to a sliver of hope. The reply came quickly. Call a taxi. I'm watching TV. Corinne's name glowed above the words, sharp as a blade. My breath caught. She was my only child, the one I had carried, fed, and fought for through every hard season. I read the line again, searching for some sign of playfulness, some hint it was a poor joke. But there was none. A second message popped up, this one from Ethan. Stay in the hospital. It's better without you. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. My chest tightened, not from stitches, but from something deeper, something raw and wordless. They weren't just refusing to come. They were telling me that my absence was a gift, that my presence in their lives was nothing but a burden. I sat back against the pillow, the room spinning, the IV tugging at my arm. For decades, I had given everything my savings, my strength, my dreams to make Corinne's life easier. And now, in the moment I needed her most, she had answered with rejection. Ethan's cruelty sealed it. The beeping of the monitors continued, steady and indifferent, as if mocking the silence on my phone. I closed my eyes, and in that silence, something inside me began to shift, carrying me toward a truth I had spent years avoiding. The days blurred together in a haze of antiseptic air, and the rhythmic beeping of machines. Nurses drifted in and out of my room with quiet efficiency, their kindness wrapped in soft voices and gentle hands. Jennifer, the one assigned to my night shifts, always asked if I wanted the window blinds opened so I could see the city lights. I told her yes, every time. It was the only reminder that life outside still moved forward. But no matter how many times I glanced at my phone, it never lit up with Corinne's name. Not a call, not a text, not even a half-hearted check-in. The last messages in our chat were from months ago, her asking for money to cover a late car payment, Ethan hinting about needing help with repairs around their house. I had answered then, just like I always did, without hesitation. Now, nothing. Doctor, Carter explained during rounds that my heart had stopped for 43 seconds on the operating table. You were gone, she said gently, her eyes steady on mine. But we brought you back. 43 seconds. I repeated it in my mind over and over, as if the number might make it more real. For less than a minute, I had been dead. No light, no voices, no warmth, just silence. And when I returned, there was no one waiting, no flowers beside my bed, no anxious daughter pacing the hallway, no familiar voice asking if I was going to be okay. A bitterness I'd tried to keep buried for years rose up sharp inside me. Maybe that was all I had ever been to Corinne, the one who paid, the one who provided, the one who never asked for anything in return. Not a mother, not someone to be loved. Just a wallet that happened to breathe. I set the phone face down on the table, its screen black and lifeless. In that darkness, I began to wonder if this silence was worse than the 43 seconds I'd spent without a heartbeat, lying in that hospital bed. I couldn't stop my mind from wandering back through the years. Each memory, another stone added to the weight pressing on my chest. I remembered the piano first, a walnut upright that had belonged to my mother, the one I used to play on quiet Sunday afternoons. Corinne had been accepted to college, and the tuition bill was more than I could manage. I told myself it was only an object, wood and strings, but when I watched two men wheel it out of our living room, it felt like they were taking a piece of me with it. Corinne had hugged me quickly, distracted by her new textbooks, and I told myself the sacrifice was worth it. Then came the wedding. My husband and I had saved for years, planning to finally take a trip together to Paris in springtime, something we'd whispered about since we were newlyweds. But when Corinne and Ethan announced they wanted a larger venue, better catering, more flowers, I folded the brochures and packed them away. Another time, I told him. He smiled weakly. But we both knew that time would never come. Instead, I watched Corinne glow beneath a canopy of roses, convinced that love was repayment enough. Later, when they wanted to buy their first house, the numbers didn't add up. Ethan's job had been shaky. Corinne's salary barely covered their bills. So I worked double shifts at the library, late nights that left my body aching and my eyes burning. Every extra hour was poured into the down payment they needed the day they signed the papers. They celebrated with champagne. I sat at home with a mug of lukewarm tea, telling myself it was enough just to see them happy. For decades, I believed love returned in kind, that loyalty followed sacrifice. But lying there now, staring at the ceiling tiles, I finally admitted the truth. I had given everything, and they had given me nothing. And that realization was colder than the silence filling my room. The morning I was discharged, the nurse wheeled me down the corridor, my bag resting in my lap like a stranger's belongings. Outside, a cold breeze cut through my coat as I stepped into the taxi waiting at the curb. The driver asked where to, and when I gave my address, my voice caught. That house had always meant safety. Now, I wasn't sure what waited for me inside. The ride felt longer than it was. I pressed my forehead against the glass, watching the city blur past, thinking about how many times I'd driven Corinne to school, to piano lessons, to sleepovers. I had always been her chauffeur, her caretaker. Today, for the first time, I was a passenger in my own life. When we pulled into the driveway, I paused before paying the fare, staring at the house I had spent decades maintaining. The shutters were chipped, the lawn overgrown, and yet my heart still ached with the memory of the weekends I spent painting, trimming, repairing always for them. Inside, the air was stale, dishes piled high in the sink, food hardened to the plates. Empty takeout containers littered the counters. In the living room, pizza boxes and half-empty glasses covered the coffee table, while blankets tangled across the couch as though someone had been living there carelessly. I walked down the hallway to my study, a place I had once guarded as my private corner of peace. It was unrecognizable. Ethan's boxes of tools and old electronics were stacked against the walls. Corinne's clothes were thrown over the chair I used to sit in to read. Dust clung to the books I had arranged so carefully. It wasn't just neglect. It was invasion. The sharpness of the betrayal cut deeper than any scalpel. They hadn't only abandoned me in the hospital. They had celebrated my absence. My illness had been their freedom, and my home had become their playground. I sat heavily on the edge of the bed in the guest room, clutching my coat around me. The house that once echoed with sacrifice now felt like evidence, each corner whispering of how little I meant to them. And in that silence, I felt something inside me harden, pointing me toward a decision I could no longer avoid. That night, after the house had gone still, I walked quietly to my study. The sight of Ethan's boxes and Corinne's dresses strewn over my chair made my stomach tighten, but I stepped around them. My hands knew where to go, even in the dark. Behind the lower bookshelf, hidden under a loose panel, sat the small steel safe I had relied on for years. I knelt slowly, feeling the pull of stitches in my chest, and turned the dial. The numbers came easily. Corinne's birthday. For so long, I thought it fitting. A reminder of who I was doing all this for. The lock clicked open with a soft groan. And inside lay the folder that held my will. I carried it to the desk, brushing away Ethan's clutter so I could spread out the papers. My eyes moved over the neat legal language, every line reflecting decades of devotion. The house, the savings accounts, the retirement funds, all of it designated for Corinne. I had written it with love, believing she would cherish not just the things, but the meaning behind them, believing she would see it as proof of how much I had given. But now, her words echoed in me like poison. Call a taxi. I'm watching TV. Stay in the hospital. It's better without you. I had nearly died, and that was her response. I stared at the will until the letters blurred. What had once felt like security now looked like chains, binding me to people who didn't care if I lived or died. Perhaps the truest gift I could leave was not wealth to be squandered, but freedom. Freedom for myself, at last. I slid the folder back into the safe, closed it, and rested my palm against the cool metal. My heart pounded, not with weakness, but with resolve. Tomorrow, I would call a lawyer. Tomorrow, I would rewrite everything. For the first time in years, I felt the faintest glimmer of control returning to me, carrying me into a night where, for once, I slept without dreams. The next morning, I was sipping weak tea at the kitchen table when the front door opened without so much as a knock. Corinne's voice carried through the hallway, bright and rehearsed. "Mom, we brought you something." She stepped into the kitchen holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers, their stems still dripping from the plastic wrap. Ethan followed behind, his smile stretched too wide, balancing a paper bag that smelled faintly of takeout. "Well, look at you," Corinne said, her tone syrupy as she placed the flowers in front of me. "We were so worried. We should have visited sooner. But you know how life gets." I studied her face, so carefully arranged into concern. Her eyes slid past me quickly, already darting around the room. Ethan pulled out a chair, setting the bag down. "Got your favorite soup," he said. "Figured you wouldn't feel like cooking." His gaze lingered too long on the hallway, the direction of my study. I nodded, letting the silence stretch, watching them shift under it. Corinne sat, tapping her manicured nails against the table. "So," she began casually, "the hospital bills must be a lot. Did insurance cover most of it? Or are you dipping into your savings again?" Ethan chuckled, adding, "Yeah, you've always been good with money. Honestly, we don't know how you manage it all." Their words layered with false admiration, but I caught the hunger beneath them. Corinne leaned forward, her eyes soft but calculated. "Maybe I could help you organize things you know, bank accounts, the paperwork, just to take the stress off." I sipped my tea slowly, hiding the smile tugging at my lips. For years, I had convinced myself that any scrap of kindness from them was genuine. But today, I saw it clearly. Every gesture was a transaction, every word a performance meant to secure what they believed was already theirs. I thanked them politely, my voice steady. They seemed relieved, mistaking my calm for ignorance. But inside, something steadier was forming, a quiet certainty. I no longer felt fooled by their masks. I had already decided where the future would go, and it would not include them. 2 days later, I walked into the polished downtown office of Jonathan Hale, an estate attorney recommended by a colleague at the library. The receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile, And soon I was ushered into a room lined with shelves of heavy law books. Jonathan rose from behind his desk, his silver hair catching the light. "Mrs. Marlowe?" he said warmly, extending his hand. "How can I help you today?" I sat, smoothing the papers I had carried in my bag. My heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I need to change my will. I began, my voice quiet but unwavering. "I want everything I own, the house, the savings, my retirement accounts to go to the Heart Foundation. Not to my daughter, not to her husband, no exceptions." Jonathan's pen stilled above his notepad. He studied me for a long moment, weighing the seriousness of my words. "That is a substantial change," he said carefully, "and it will shock them." I met his gaze without flinching. They shocked me first. The air between us settled with finality. He leaned back in his chair, then nodded. "Very well. We can structure this so you still live comfortably. But the assets pass directly to the foundation upon your death. It will be ironclad," as he explained the process, outlining documents and witnesses. I felt a strange lightness spread through me, the weight of decades, the sacrifices. The endless giving seemed to lift, replaced by something sharper and steadier. For once, my choices were not about Corinne or Ethan, they were about me. By the time I left his office, carrying a folder of drafts and instructions, the winter air felt different against my skin. The city streets hummed with noise and life, and for the first time in 62 years, I felt like I was finally steering my own. Tomorrow, Jonathan would begin the paperwork. Tomorrow, my legacy would be rewritten. Rebecca Mills from the Heart Foundation met me in her office the following week. She was brisk, professional, and full of energy. The kind of woman who believed in the power of stories to move people. After listening to my account of what had happened, she tapped her pen against her notebook and said, "This needs to be heard, not just for you, for every patient who's been abandoned when they needed family most." That afternoon, she arranged an interview with a local news station. The studio lights were harsh, but I kept my back straight, hands folded in my lap. The anchor asked gentle but pointed questions, and I answered each one with steady clarity. When I needed them most, I said, my voice calm, though my chest tightened with memory. My daughter told me to call a taxi. Her husband told me to stay in the hospital because it was better without me, so I left them out of my will. My estate will go to the Heart Foundation, to people who actually understand the value of life. The anchor nodded, sympathy in his eyes. When the camera light dimmed, Rebecca squeezed my hand. You did beautifully. You'll be helping more people than you know. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, the television tuned to the 6 o'clock broadcast. My own face appeared on the screen, calm and composed, recounting every word. Below me, the caption read, "Local woman donates. Entire estate after family abandons her post-surgery." Across town, I imagined Corinne and Ethan watching the same report, their cruelty replayed in front of thousands. I didn't have to imagine long. Within minutes, my phone lit up with their names flashing again and again. Call after call, message after message. Panic threaded through every attempt. I set the phone face down on the table, letting the vibrations hum against the wood as I poured myself a cup of tea. The world now knew what they had hidden behind their smiles, and for the first time, they were the ones scrambling in silence. It didn't take long for them to show up. I heard the tires screeching against the curb before the knock rattled my front door. Corinne burst in first, mascara smudged. Ethan trailing behind with his jaw tight and fists clenched. "Mom, please," Corinne cried, reaching for me as if the news report hadn't just replayed her cruelty for the entire city. "You don't understand, we didn't mean it. We were stressed. We weren't thinking clearly. Ethan's tone was harder. This is madness. Evelina, do you know what people are saying about us? You've humiliated your own family. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around my teacup. Their words spilled out in waves, pleading, bargaining, threatening, but they no longer reached me. The days of shrinking under their demands were gone. You had decades to show me kindness, I said evenly, my voice steady against their chaos. You didn't, and when I needed you most, you told me life was better without me. Now you'll see what life without me really means. Corinne collapsed into a chair, sobbing, while Ethan paced like a caged animal. His anger filled the room. But I felt nothing, just a cool, heavy calm. You have 24 hours to leave this house, I told them quietly. After that, I don't want to see either of you here again, for a moment. The silence was so thick, it seemed to press against the walls. Corinne's cries turned hollow. Ethan's rage sputtered into silence, and the balance shifted. They were no longer in control. They were the beggars now, clinging to a life that was never truly theirs. I stood, pouring the rest of my tea down the sink, already preparing myself for the solitude that would follow. By the next evening, the house was empty. Their cars had pulled out of the driveway, with boxes crammed into every seat. Corinne's face streaked with tears, Ethan's jaw locked in fury. When the door closed behind them, I stood in the stillness and let the silence settle over me. For the first time in decades, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like air filling my lungs. I walked slowly from room to room, touching the edges of furniture that suddenly belonged only to me. No clutter in the sink. No raised voices echoing down the hallway. No footsteps pounding above me. The house, stripped of their presence, seemed to exhale. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. For years, every plan had revolved around Corinne and Ethan. Now the list was mine alone: a weekend trip to the coast, a photography class at the community center, afternoons volunteering at the Heart Foundation. Small steps, but each one pointed toward a life I had never dared to claim. In the quiet, I thought of the nurses who had checked on me in the hospital, of Rebecca at the foundation, of strangers who had written kind messages after seeing my interview. Family wasn't blood. It was the people who showed up when you needed them. As the sun began to sink, I carried my tea out to the porch. The sky burned with streaks of orange and violet, the light spilling gently across the lawn. I wrapped my shawl tighter and let the evening hush around me. This silence is not loneliness, I whispered to myself. It's freedom.